Hey there guys, and welcome back to episode 5 of San Francisco. It's a beautiful sunny day in San Francisco and we are just cruising around checking out some of the sights. So let's get down to business. Today's episode is indeed the world's most famous prison, Alcatraz. And to build this, we have to, of course, move to the north and offshore to this tiny little rock that was left on this map when I imported the height map originally. And if I told you that I was excited to build this, it wouldn't even be the tip of the iceberg. I am absolutely fizzing inside to be able to have a crack at building this. And if you're unfamiliar with Alcatraz, much like I was, except for knowing obviously the basics, then there's actually a lot more to it than you would originally think. So it became quite a difficult build in the end, and to make it even more difficult, I added in real pedestrian paths and real entertainment cube services, so this actually becomes an attraction at the end of the episode, and it is brilliant watching the little ferries cruise out. Anyway, that's enough talking, let's crack into this episode and get building. The first thing you'll see me do here is plop down the vanilla prison, and admittedly I make it PO here and get rid of most of it and just keep pretty much the main building, and I'm using this just as a sort of a scale. I know that the ultimate overall size of this island is probably a little bit off, much like the rest of the map, you know, it's not 1-to-1, so I really need to get a main building down so that I can scale off of that, and I actually want to start with the very edge of the island, so all of the detailing on the cliffs where it meets the water, and these buildings being up here scaled to the sort of correct size or close enough is going to help me scale the rest of what I build. I did at this stage actually have intentions of running with this prison building and just dressing it up a bit with props and stuff, but I was actually bothered because it's not the right colour, so you'll see me change it quite late in the episode actually to probably something more appropriate, I think. So now we can push on to detailing the edge of the island, and I wanted to show you guys exactly which props I've used here. I'm using the seawall, some grey flame rocks and various rock props from Vecchio Cristo, and you'll also see me PO a wharf from Robert, and this was built for the Sydney series, and later on I slip a Ferry cube service in here and make it active, which is super cool. It brings heaps of tourists out here, so it doesn't just become this old forgotten build that lies out at sea. It's actually usable and you can see movement, and it's really cool. So in real life we have a path that runs around the east of the island from the wharf that runs up a series of paths to the top and then eventually into the prison main building, and that particular path is going to run around on top of these seawall rocks and then snake its way up to that top level. This eastern side of the island is probably the most straightforward, at least detailing wise. There's just a big open court that ends up in here with just various bush and foliage around. Well, so much for me changing the main building later on in the episode. It is happening right now. I'm not sure why I thought it was later. But anyway, looking at the main building here from Alcatraz, we can see it's actually much whiter. And admittedly, I don't really get it bang on at all. But I think this is a much more appropriate building than the original one I've had here, and it just takes a bit of work with procedural objects to sort of get it into the shape that I'm after. And it wasn't just the colour of this building, obviously the style of the windows I thought was pretty close as well, and admittedly I could have gone hunting on the workshop and got something probably even closer, but I think this is close enough. And once I've got those buildings where I want them, I can push on and put some solar panels on the roof, and admittedly I did this off camera, but all I've done is use PO on a solar panel and put a whole lot of them all over the roof, because the real life one looks like the roofs are covered in solar panels, so I'm sure to put some of those up as well. Now we can swing around to what would be the north of the island, or the wharf side, and the first thing I want to do here is put the pedestrian paths in place. But there's also some very cool and interesting things on this side of the island, and the first one I put in here is this sort of shell of a building, and this is, I think, the warden's house or the warden's office, whatever. I'm pretty sure it's one of those two. And there's also like a little warden's garden area out the back here as well, or rather a officer's row garden. And the building that I installed that is closest to the wharf area is now a residential apartment area, and I'm not sure if that was originally what it was or whether that's what it is now. You'll also see me put in the Alcatraz guardhouse with the little red roof, and the rest of the area is made up with detailing this zigzagging path that winds its way down the side of the island. So at this point I consider the easy side of the island done. Now I can move on to detailing the edge of the island much like we did earlier, but this time on the remaining west side that needs it. Now, one noticeable thing about this side of the island, especially compared to the east side of the island, is this is much more rugged. There's not much coastline developed around here. There's no walks around the very edge. This looks very much like the industrial end, or the service and supply end, whatever you want to call it. And before I go any further, I'd realised that I'd made the end of the main building too long and too large on this end, so you'll see me sort of amend that first, which means of course I have to reposition some of the solar panels, so you'll get to see it this time. But the whole reason I've made the building smaller on this end is because we have to fit, it looks like this outdoor courtyard in, which is really cool, and I didn't have room for it originally. But now we do, so that's great. And next I can move on to installing what looks like an old abandoned power factory or something with a big chimney. Maybe it's a smoker or a crematorium, I'm not too sure here. But I've actually used the vanilla abandoned factory because I think it looks pretty perfect, to be honest. So I just turn that to PO and squeeze it down a little bit, and then next I want to carry on getting all the paths in. And this means that they are connected right around the island now, so later on when we get tourists out here they can walk around to various cubes that I'm going to put in, which is really cool. And I've also tried to keep these paths as close to their original position as possible as well. And you've also probably noticed that I've used a concrete path the whole way around rather than making my own and turning it invisible. And the reason I've done this is because where it zigzags, in particular up the side of the island, it's much easier and quicker to detail it if we just use this path. Otherwise we need to make all of the surfaces out of either ploppable asphalt or surface networks, and this takes an incredibly long time to do. So using these concrete paths was much quicker, a real time saver. And now I can start to build up the rest of the area a bit more seriously, and immediately next to, I'm going to call it the abandoned power station, looks like just an industrial area for drop-offs and services. So it looks like there's just random pallets and things out there, and it's generally pretty untidy. So this is the area where I'll put the most props down, probably on the entire island. And you'll also see me install the walls for the courtyard. I also make sure there's access via some stairs from the main building, and we plop some surface networks down as concrete inside the courtyard. I'm also sure to chuck down this really iconic looking water tower, and there looks like there's a spooky old abandoned building right out on the point that I've just tried to nail. And can someone please confirm that this is haunted, because I'm going to take a wild guess and say this is haunted, man, and I'm just going to be heartbroken if it isn't. Now we can start detailing up what's left of the island, and most of it is the south side that faces back towards San Francisco. And I forgot to mention earlier that this building here that's closest to our spooky building on the point is now New Industries buildings, and I'm not too sure what that means exactly, but yeah, this is sort of a little replica of it, I suppose. And there's also another cliff behind this building that sort of goes up towards where the courtyard is and up to where the water tower is. And there's also a space on the cliff here immediately below the courtyard where it looks like there's prisoners' gardens down the terraced bank. So I use a grass prop there and PO it and squeeze it out really big and sort of make them various sizes to create that terraced garden. So this is what our little version of Alcatraz Island looks like once we've finished most of the detailing. Now I want to switch over to the mainland for a while and put in a ferry stop over there that leads tourists out to the island. So before I start building over here, I've got to mention I've been chatting with a bloke named Dave on Reddit, and he's been giving me a lot of information about San Francisco, and he's only just recently told me where the actual launch from the mainland that goes to Alcatraz leaves from, and I realise I've actually got it in the wrong place here. I'm building on where I think North Point would be here, so eventually I'll move this ferry stop over. So what you're seeing me do here, I do change up a little bit, but I've used Avania's one of her modular piers here, and originally I wanted to put a ferry cube service in it so that I could sort of detail up my own, and I was actually trying to do it with the ferry depot, and this was really embarrassing when I figured it out, but I think in the end I actually put in a vanilla ferry stop and then just put various props around it. And of course a ferry stop doesn't work if there's another one at the destination, so we have to whip out to Alcatraz and put a road in here and then try and get some sort of a ferry stop. And here you are seeing me persist with the depot. I haven't quite figured it out yet, which is quite hard to watch, to be honest, but nevertheless I want to get a line in that goes right around the island so that on your way in and out on the boat we get a really cool view, different views of it. And eventually when I get a ferry stop in here, I use the building spawn point mod to change the service area for that ferry on the Alcatraz island back on the mainland, because I figure the trucks and services would drop the stuff off to a boat and obviously it would come out on that. So I've done that for the cube services and entertainment blocks out on the Alcatraz island as well. So here's where I finally clicked on and changed over to the ferry stop, and it's just the vanilla one, and to be honest the vanilla one looks really nice. I've got no problem with this whatsoever. So I move it over to the side a little bit and then just pull over the detailed little pier that I had made and plop that next to it. I also use procedural objects on a white modern looking building and plop that on the pier as well, and I sort of want this to look like it's like an external ticket booth, or maybe it's a cafe or a place where you can buy your ferry tickets from all combined into one. Either way, it doesn't matter too much now because like I said earlier, I'm going to be moving this around closer to where it's located in real life. So you'll also see me use that vanilla ferry stop out on Alcatraz Island, and I just sort of combined it in with that PO'd wharf that I've used earlier from Robert and tried to fit them together so that it sort of looks appropriate. And it's not perfect, but it definitely actually looks pretty good, I reckon. For now I've just plopped the cube depot service just next to the ferry stop on land, and eventually we'll detail that up a bit more as well. I would have loved to have detailed all of this coast properly and done it, yeah, like I say, properly, but for now this is going to have to do because Alcatraz just took a lot longer than I had bargained for. So at this point we've got our ferry line in, it's working, we've got our cube services in, they're all working, and the spawn point mod's helping me out. So I wanted to go into the Steam workshop and see if there was any ferries from San Francisco that we could use, and I found this old big historic one, and it doesn't quite look right being used on this line. Admittedly, I'm pretty sure this is just parked up in a marina somewhere for tourists to have a look at, so I'll probably just look to do that in future. So for now I'm just going to stick with the vanilla ferry, but if anyone has any suggestions as to a ferry I could use or an appropriate one that you know of, please by all means let me know. I'm stoked we've got another iconic part of San Francisco all built, and it's fair to say that the tourists are loving it. The other thing that's got me stoked is there isn't actually that many props out here, believe it or not, which of course helps me keep clear of those pesky limits. So thank you guys so much for watching again, I appreciate your comments, and if you've subscribed, thank you very much, and I will see you on the next one. See you later.